This meeting is being recorded. I'm Peter Larson, the chair of the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Professor Mira Sucharov, professor at Carleton University, and a longtime blogger, Facebook writer, article writer, columnist in Haaretz, and frequently in places like the Globe and Mail and so on and so forth. Mira, thank you very much for fitting us into your very busy schedule.
You're very welcome.
Mira, you have been on my radar for a long time, but you really surprised me recently with an article that was in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. I think I've got the word correct. Basically declaring your love for Israel and your love for Hebrew culture, but saying that you also feel very strongly about solidarity with Palestinians, and you're trying to find a group of people who somehow melds those two seemingly contradictory impulses. What led you to do that?
And I think the point is that for me, they're very much not in contradiction. And that's what I'm really trying to, that's the space I'm trying to create, and the group and organization that I'm trying to help push forward. So yeah, it started because I was, as I wrote in the article, I was riding my bike on a weekend with my husband. And as we got to downtown Ottawa, near the American Embassy, near the Byward Market, there was a convoy of cars that passed us, honking with Israeli flags and balloons and shades of blue and white. And this was right in the midst of the Israel-Hamas war, trading of firepower. And I just was a bit stunned. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but I was a bit stunned at not why they would do this, but it was a bit stunned at the mode of celebratory, in your face parading when there were so many lives being lost right at that time. But at the same time, the Israeli flag is very resonant for me because as a young person, I grew up with that flag as very much a cultural symbol in Jewish day school, at Israeli Independence Day. We wore blue and white when we sang Hebrew songs at concerts. And of course, now I know that flags are associated with states and all their policies. So I mean, I'm not naive about a flag, but thinking about it a bit more deeply, it's not just a flag, but it's the idea of Hebrew language. I speak only Hebrew to my kids. I love the Hebrew language. I love Hebrew songs. I love 70s Israeli folk rock. And I love being in Israel. I love walking the streets of Tel Aviv and having my favorite watering holes. But at the same time, I'm very disturbed, to put it lightly, about the direction Israel has been going in. And I wanted to create a space for full Palestine solidarity, but among people who feel that they have some cultural skin in the game. And this is where I had never found a home in other spaces for that reason.
Just so that I will post a link to both your Facebook page and to your declaration of principles. But just briefly, where do you land differently from a liberal-minded liberal Zionist who is also very much concerned by Netanyahu, by the settlers, and so on and so forth, but who comes down firmly on the notion that there needs to be a Jewish state, and that to do that, you have to maintain a Jewish majority, and that means no right of return for the Palestinians, and so on and so on. So where do you align with and differentiate yourself from those people as I've described them?
In the 7 principles we laid out for the group, and I'll just note that, yes, it's starting out as a Facebook group, and then we hope that eventually it might turn into a broader, in real life, IRL, as they say, action group, and maybe a joint Jewish-Palestinian solidarity group, though waiting to see on that, because right now Palestinian solidarity groups, I think, understandably don't feel a large push to want to invest in Hebrew and Jewish culture. That's not their main issue. So I'm sort of giving them their space to do their thing, and a help from the sidelines through ours. But asking about the principles. So we have these 7 principles, and interestingly, we don't mention the word Zionism, nor do we mention the word anti-Zionism or non-Zionism. We don't mention the word Jewish state. And what was the other thing? Yeah, liberal Zionism. We don't mention a lot of those buzzwords, because what we're really trying to do is we're trying to avoid what's often happened, where people end up boxing themselves in and putting themselves in camps due to their understanding of a particular label that may not be shared by others.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think you and I both know this issue well enough to know what the implications are of a lot of these labels, but not everyone thinks of it the same way. So what differentiates us from a lot of the other groups that you may be thinking of that are probably closer to the liberal Zionist label, but again, we don't like those labels because we find them kind of unhelpful, is that we call for full recognition of Palestinian refugee return. I also call in the article, but the edits came out a little later after the principles have been drafted, but I would also personally like to see the maintenance of the Jewish law of return alongside refugee return. So I think what we're trying to say is we're not trying to roll back history and have Jews leave and make way for Palestinians. And that's often the fear that you hear a lot of Zionists raise, that they just want to throw us into the sea, or they want to end the idea of the Jewish state. They want to destroy the Jewish state. We're trying to leave those ideas out of there. And instead, we're trying to talk about the possibility of a reimagined polity that elevates both national communities and elevates both cultures and both linguistic traditions and perhaps religious traditions, although would want a strict separation between religion and state, right. But so that neither is assimilated into the other and both are honored for the cultural richness, Palestinian, Arabic culture, Jewish, Israeli culture, their cultural richness that they each represent.
Now, I noticed that I don't have the 7 principles memorized, but the first 3 are very much aligned with or congruent with the 3 demands of the BDS movement, although you don't mention BDS either as I assume it's because for the same reason, it's a bit of a red flag. But am I reading your principles correctly?
Yes, we don't mention BDS or anti-BDS. What we do say is we won't stand in the way of the Palestinian right to nonviolent resistance. Now, some Palestinians may read that and say, it's not enough. We need you to support all our nonviolent resistance. And I'm certainly sympathetic to that claim, but I knew that if we wrote it that way, people would say, well, therefore you are BDS, and then we would lose a lot of momentum. Because again, what we're trying to do is not jump onto the catchwords and litmus tests that have served to stall a lot of what could be really constructive momentum. So yes, our principles are the same 3 main pillars of the BDS movement. Where the BDS movement has generated, I would say, its most productive or its most, I would say, effective opposition is in its tactics, because it's its tactics that people can say, like particularly the academic and cultural boycott, people could say, oh, you're against academic knowledge, you're against cultural exchange, and we just don't want to go there either way. So we want to talk about what we're aiming for, and we don't have particular laid out tactics. We haven't said, if you join this group, you are committing to do a certain number of actions. That might come later, and it certainly wouldn't be as strictly delineated as the BDS principles that are outlined, for instance, in the PACB document. That's right. The cultural and academic boycott.
So right now you're at the stage of a declaration of principles. You don't have any activities yet. Is that correct?
Correct. Right now the activities are taking place in the Facebook group where there's nearing 450 members just in a few days so far. And those members have pledged to that they agree with those 7 principles. And right now the activity is discussion and deepening our thinking and really trying to understand, I think, a lot of the psychology that takes place because we're a group of Jews and we're very close to those communities, we're embedded within those communities, we're really trying to work through a lot of the trauma that Zionist Jews bring, and talking about helping ourselves advance the discourse in terms of rights, but in a way that honors the concerns that I would say that good faith Zionists have. Right.
Now, I didn't see explicit about the Facebook site. It didn't say explicitly that it's only open to Jews. It's a private group. It would make perfect sense to me that it be only open to Jews, although I would be very curious to see what kind of discussions are going on inside it. So how did you deal with that issue about who to include and who not to include?
Right. So we don't have a question of, do you identify as Jewish, though we could have. But we do have a question saying, what is your favorite Israeli, Hebrew, or maybe, I don't know if I said Israeli, I either said Hebrew or Israeli, film, piece of literature, even Hebrew word. And if someone just wrote shalom, I might message them and say, do you have any other ideas? And if someone writes Fiddler on the Roof, which isn't Hebrew, although there is a Hebrew version and there's also a Yiddish version, I might kind of probe. And that's happened more than once.
Okay.
Because we're really trying to talk about people who really feel culturally invested and, again, have skin in the game and want to further this idea of cultural flourishing. So it's more than simply a safety net, which is also important for Jews, but also the idea of a future where both are honored. We're really trying to think of what can be thought of very positively. And another thing I want to think about the other, you talked about the liberal Zionist groups. A lot of those groups, how we differ is we don't say one state or two state, but we say in the principles that one of the things we don't agree with is the pushing of two states or bust, meaning that a lot of the international consensus right now and US foreign policy, even Canadian foreign policy, a lot of mainstream Jewish groups say there must be a two-state solution. And, you know, hypothetically that could work, but I think what we're seeing now is there is a one-state reality. And that's even the term that Ian Lustig uses in his excellent recent book, Paradigm Lost. And given that there is a one-state reality, we need to be thinking in a rights-based framework that honors, as I said, the cultural and physical flourishing of both communities. So it could end up being one state, it could end up being two states, it could end up being confederation. And there's a lot of exciting writings going on now about confederated models. So that's where we are on two states.
Well, those of us who are interested in a thoughtful discussion of the Israel-Palestine question, but very curious to find out what's going to go on inside your black box and what's going to come out of it. So we hope that we hear things going forward. I do have one final question. The title of it you refer to, you use the terminology Israel/Palestine. I'm sure you thought about that versus Israel and Palestine or whatever. How did you come to that framing of it, Israel/Palestine?
I'm never fully confident when I use the slash or the hyphen or the dash. In this, the slash or the hyphen or the and. In this case, I copied the title of my book and Social Justice in Israel-Palestine, and our editor and my co-editor and the acquisitions editor had a very good discussion about the purpose of the slash. And I don't fully remember it now, but it made sense at the time. So I think the point is that people should be able to read themselves into these possibilities. It's both Israel and it's Palestine. I mean, right now, a lot of memes are going around in Instagram trying to erase Israel and say it's not Israel, it's Palestine. And we're trying not to engage in erasure. We're trying to engage in elevation of two communities.
Well, Mira, I find this an exciting development, interesting development. I wish you good luck, and please make a report out of the box every once in a while so we find it what's out. Presumably, if you continue to grow and you have some success in congealing, we will hear more about you and about this group going forward. So, Mira Sucharov, thank you very much for spending a few minutes with us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.